Hi everyone. Hi Tegan. Sorry, I got joined a little bit later. I didn't realize there were already people on here, but I was going to give people a couple more minutes to join. I know we have 50 or so people that signed up for the call, so I would expect about 20 or so to show up, hopefully 25. So we'll give them a few more minutes and then we can get started. Thanks for coming, Dr. Tegan.
I'm happy to be here.
Let me make sure that our sharing, do you have a PowerPoint to share?
I do.
Okay, let me make sure that I can give you access so you can work on that while people are joining. All right, you should be able to share. You don't have to pull it up right now, but if you wanted to just double check and make sure that it's good on your end, you can check that out real quick.
It's a great idea.
And then while we're still waiting for people to join, if there's anybody in here who is a part of our online program, Making Mat or Strength for Cheer, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. We can use these first couple minutes to go over any questions anyone has about their programming. And then throughout this whole call, I want it to be as interactive as possible. Dr. Tegan created a great PowerPoint on performing under pressure. But if you guys have any questions, drop it into the chat before you forget what you are going to ask. And that way we can look at the chat at the end of the PowerPoint or if there's something that wants to be answered during the call, that's fine. But just drop it into the chat so that we have your questions in there so we can answer them as best as we can.
I love it. I actually, there will be times in the middle of the slideshow that chat might be really helpful. So, having it pulled up right away would be great.
Perfect. If you guys want to, so we can start getting used to the chat, if you would just throw in what type of cheer team you're a part of. So whether you're on a high school team, college, all-star, if you want to put your school team name in there or your all-star team name, go ahead and drop that in. And then also drop in where you're located at. So what state are you from? So what state and what cheer team are you from? Put that into the chat, and then we can get started in 1 or 2 more minutes. No one wants to be the first person in the chat? Oh, here we go. Um, I'm going to say this wrong. Your sinus college cheer. I hope I said that right. Nora, welcome. Someone from Kansas, high school and competitive cheer, competitive all-star. Welcome, Krista. And then Tegan, are you able to see the chat as well?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we have a couple from the same college cheer team in Pennsylvania. Welcome. Another Maria. Nice to meet you, Maria. I'm also Maria. High school in Texas. All right, so it looks like we got mostly high school and college age range on here.
Pennsylvania, Collegeville, Pennsylvania. Looks pretty cool.
All right, we can go ahead and get started. I think we'll have a couple people rolling in a little bit late, but that's totally fine. Welcome everybody. I am Maria. I am the owner of the Cheer Doctor, where we help cheerleaders go from good to great through physical therapy and strength training programs. Today, I have guest speaker Dr. Tegan Reeves, and she really focuses on the mental side of performance. So we know that performance is not just physical, it's also highly mental, especially in a sport such as cheerleading, where you have usually only 2.5 minutes to complete a routine, high pressure situation. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Tegan here to talk with us a little bit more. And so I'll let you give a little bit of a better background on yourself. I know you're a former cheerleader, have lots of experience in this space. So go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can just go ahead and get started.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Really excited to see everybody. So I was a college cheerleader a long time ago, and actually I was on the very first all-girl team at Iowa State University and was in the middle of a pyramid that imploded on mat and then completely blocked out on my standing tumbling and then didn't make finals that year. And actually that was the start of all of it for me, was to really start to research and understand why things like that happen in performance. I was also a dancer and professional dancer and had an injury, and so really had to kind of look at myself. I worked for UCA and it was staff, and then also started the dance side of the dance worlds in USASF before I went on to my PhD, and I work in mental performance now. I do want to kind of give some just like hints and ground rules as far as Zoom. If you would like to be on camera, I would love to see you. It's great, but it's not necessary. There's lots and lots of times throughout that I'm going to ask for feedback and interaction. And so if you want to jump on to the microphone and unmute yourself and jump on camera, that would be awesome. The chat is something that we're going to use too, and I would love for us to be able to use words and emojis and really interact with each other. Opportunities like this isn't just space to learn, but also to kind of learn from each other and meet each other. And so we can't be in person, but I'm hoping that we get to do some of that here. And finally, Magnolia, my dog, says hello. I'm not sure if you heard her bark. Finally, there are reactions at the bottom of your screen. If anybody jumps on to camera or off of mute, especially, I just really encourage you to use reactions so that we can be interactive here. But I'm going to get started. So I'm a performance psychologist. My doctorate is in learning psychology, and I really focused on the nervous system. And really, what not just myself, but performance psychologists across the globe have found is that there are these three key areas of performance psychology that will really help us perform and do our best. And the first is awareness. We're going to do a lot of awareness building today. There's a lot of understanding our patterns and behaviors and being able to check into what our performance is like, but there's also action and practices, things like mindfulness practices, breathing exercises, visualization, that just like you would practice in the gym, on mat, in actual practice, for those of you in college and high school, those practices can also really help you build. And so while today is a lot about understanding, there's also going to be some moments where I'm just going to share some examples of practice with you. And I'm happy to expand on that. And then finally, one of the key components to all of this is reflection. And I like to think about this like when we get our score sheets back, when we go to a competition, it gives us a way to really reflect on how we're doing. And reflection, when it comes to the nervous system, is really important. So that's just kind of a baseline, but I'm going to really jump into what it is that pressure does. And it's to do that, it's important to understand that there is actually a difference in clinical mental health and what we would call mental performance. One example of clinical mental health is that in other sports, we call it the yips or twisties, but also clinical depression. Another example is something that actually can be diagnosed as clinical burnout or anxiety. And while we're not going to talk a lot about those today, we're really focusing on the center, which is drive and discipline, confidence, and stress modulation. That's really where the performance psychology comes in. However, there is this in these clinical mental health spaces, there is this space where we're going to start to understand that there's a little bit of in between. When we're in the yips and twisties or depression side, it's like we're not even facing the target. And then on the other side of it, we can overshoot. So performance is facing a target and trying to actually perform, just like we would have goals or a target that we're performing at. And when we get to the ends of the spectrum, that's when we get into the more clinical spaces. The thing is that there's a whole lot in between. And so emotion and mindset, and also the amount of stress or pressure we have, is really going to modulate when we get into one of those areas. And we'll get a little bit more into this, but it's a nice kind of like starting point to say that there is high performance and then there is underperforming and overperforming through a mental performance or performance psychology lens. And so we're not just, when we're talking about performing, we're not just talking about doing our absolute best, but we're also talking about when we do too much. And that will get into a little bit more as we go on. So this, when we map this onto research, we find that there's actually quite a bit of research on this inverted U. So if you chart out poor performance to high performance and how much stress, we find that there is actually an optimal stress zone. So this is learning point number one, is that there is an optimal space, an optimal amount of stress that we can put ourselves under. And that's going to be different for every single person. That's why things like a pre-performance routine for one person will really work well, but would be too agitating for another person. And so, again, going back to that self-awareness and kind of understanding ourselves, reflecting on what is best for us, knowing what your optimal performance zone is really, really crucial. And we will always have this spectrum in between. So this is a moving target, and part of understanding it is understanding that, in fact, the amount of pressure that you need might be different, or your athletes need might be different than the amount of pressure that somebody else needs. Again, we kind of go back to this. Sometimes when there's not enough pressure, it's like we're not even facing the target. But other times when there's too much pressure, that's when we can either blow straight through it or we're just like doing too much and there's arrows going everywhere. So to understand this optimal performance zone, there's some physiology that's going to be important. I know we have a wide range. We have some high school and college, and so I'll try not to use too many science terms, but understanding that this is all in our body. It's not, while this is mental performance, it's happening in our whole entire body. So first, it's happening in our gut. It's happening in our digestive system. And there is information that, just like a gut reaction, if you get a gut reaction to something, or you get a stomach ache when you're nervous, there's information that our gut can give us. This is actual science. There's information that goes to our nervous system or our brain to say maybe there's too much, or if you're completely rested and you don't have stress and you're digesting, then there's not enough. This also happens with the cardiovascular system. So our heart rate is, we call it a bidirectional signal. So when we get stress, our heart rate goes up. Also, if our heart rate goes up for another reason, it is a signal to our system that we have stress. And that's not a bad thing. So if there is one thing that I want anybody to take away from this, it's that stress is actually not a bad thing. It's just that sometimes we can have too much or too little. And we're using stress and pressure in the same terminology here, but this pink zone of stress is actually called eustress. And when we're not shooting enough or overshooting our target, that's called distress. And the cardiovascular system is the system that is the easiest to modulate. So I'm gonna pause here and give everybody a practice. We've done a lot of awareness, and I'm gonna give you a practice. I'm gonna give a little bit of science here, and there's just this tiny bit of math, but I really, really encourage you to interact. And I'm saying a lot in case you need to like get to your keyboard to get to the chat. But here's the science. Every single time we inhale, our heart rate is going up. So every single time we are breathing in, our heart rate is going up. Every single time we exhale, our heart rate is going down. And so this is something called coherence. We do this with breath work, but the science here is that, in fact, we don't have an even heart rate. Our heart rate is going up and down with our breath. So using that knowledge, If our heart rate was too high, and we have these bidirectional signals that are saying that our heart rate is getting up really high, so we're getting to the overshooting or too much stress. Can anybody math it and write in the chat what, or come off mute, what's something that you might be able to do to lower your heart rate, since the signals are bidirectional? And every time we exhale, our heart rate goes down. Anyone have ideas? I'm going to give like 30 seconds in case anyone wants to jump in. And then I might ask Maria. Oh, here we go. Shorter inhale, longer exhale. Take slow exhales. Exactly. Slow breath, exhaling longer. Exactly. See, you all get an A. The math is pretty easy. Now, box breathing, Kara or Kara, I'm not sure how to say that, but said box breathing. And that's a great example of a way to practice regulating those bidirectional signals. When we do box breathing, we're holding or retaining the breath, and then we're inhaling, and then we're holding and retaining the breath, and then we're exhaling, and it creates a little box. So if we constantly practice that, we're strengthening these like signals that go back and forth. And if you take that box and, my geometry is not very good. So, and you take a longer exhale, but a shorter inhale, it's not a box anymore. And I don't know what that is anymore, but it becomes a different shape. It's similar, right? You can hold breath and then shorten the inhale, hold breath, and lengthen the exhale. And all of these are really, really great practices that help you develop that communication, or one of my favorite neuroscientists says, what fires together wires together. And so if you do things like box breathing or breathing exercises with different counts, you're firing those signals together more so that they start to strengthen the neural pathway. And then when we actually need it, the resources are available. Oh, and this is Kai. She just jumped up on my shoulder from the ground, so I'm going to put her down. Okay, so I'm going to move into some of the other systems. The important one that I was just talking about was the brain. So all of these signals actually happen in the nervous system, and it gives our endocrine system, or the chemical kind of system in our brain, signals. So I'm going to give you, I really wants to be part of this, so I'm just going to let her. So I'm going to give you one more kind of tip and trick that I found really, really helpful, which is when our nervous system gives our brain, or endocrine system specifically, a signal that something feels some kind of way. When a feeling that's really strong comes up, it only takes 90 seconds to fully process that feeling. So if I am reminded of something that really scares me, and I feel the feelings of fear because that's coming from a chemical signal from my brain, and I know that it can process through in 90 seconds, then as long as I don't jump on that loop, as long as I don't keep thinking about it, so the chemicals keep getting processed, in 90 seconds it should pass. So that's just like another note that you can write in your practice wheel. The 90-second rule is really, really helpful when strong emotions or something we're really passionate, like cheerleading. I think that we're all pretty passionate in what we do. So maybe next time something comes up, give it 90 seconds before you give it too many thoughts, and see if you feel differently. Okay, so all of this is thank you. Yeah. I think maybe like it's a really good girlfriend thing to remind each other about the 90-second rule too, because sometimes thoughts will take us down feeling and chemical pathways that aren't as necessary. So this is all the nervous system. And there is this, I really kind of geek out about this. There's this vagus nerve that actually runs down the central spine, and then in all the like cavernous spaces. So this is, thank you, Talia. She is now like sleeping right by the keyboard. So this picture is an artistic rendition. It's not it's not at all what it actually looks like. But this idea that there are all of these like bidirectional nerves in all of the cavernous spaces in our body that are like taking on information from our surroundings and then giving our gut, our heart rate, our respiratory system, our brain information really helps me to start to say, okay, sometimes the signals that I'm getting or the information that my nervous system is getting might not actually be right. And so I can get scared or I can have a feeling and wait 90 seconds. And then I get to kind of like decide how to respond. Then I'll get back to that a little bit later. But we do know that when we are in these outside zones of too much and too little pressure, that all of those systems working together actually look very, very different. So the idea that stress is a good thing and that there's like this eustress or this purple zone or pink zone, depending on what your computer screen looks like, gives us this space to say, okay, when I have a whole lot, we call it the default mode network in the brain. When I have a whole lot of things, or I'm kind of just like zoning out, when my heart rate is low, when my digestive system is moving and my circulation isn't super high, I'm in this low pressure zone. And when I have like these blinders on because the brain gives little micro doses of dopamine to put blinders on. It's great if I'm like running from a tiger because having blinders on means that I don't stop and say, oh, like, this is a pretty tree, or should I go right or should I go left? But actually, when those blinders are on, when my heart rate is high and my breath is shallow, when I have a whole bunch of blood flowing to my thighs, there's science behind that too, that I'm over activated and unless I'm actually running from a tiger, maybe there's too much. And so we can start to kind of, it's called interoception. If you want to write that one down, or I will put it in the chat. We can start to use this awareness or this like felt sense of our body to understand how much pressure is good for us and how much pressure is bad for us. And spoiler alert, we can actually use all of these practices to widen our window or to be able to take on more and less pressure and still optimally perform. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to really identify these cold and hot areas. So when we're underperforming, this is called a dorsovagal state, and it looks like shutdown. And there's also, it's called freeze or fawn mode. And then when we're in this overperforming state, it looks like we're fighting or we're ready to really step in and run away from a tiger. And so these hot and cold zones is the language that I use, and you get to use your own language. When I first started this research, the outsides were red zones, and so I still have some trainees that I worked with that will say I'm getting into my red zone. But I think hot and cold. I'm trying on hot and cold because then we can actually get into the under and over performing space. But you can find your own language. This name it. It's naming it to tame it. Another steal from that neuroscientist that loves to have acronyms. But when we can name things like I'm cold right now and I need to upregulate, or I'm a little hot right now and I need to downregulate, that helps us to reconnect our frontal lobe or like our executive function, and it gives us a little bit more power. So I'm going to talk about this one area because it's the most powerful area that we can really use to be in this optimal stress zone, and that's called stress modulation. I do not use stress management because I don't think that management is what we're doing with stress. Stress is a good thing, right? We're learning that. And so we actually can just use modulation as a way to say that we can move stress and use it when we become more aware. So first off, let's talk about that cold zone and what that looks like. Apathy and avoidance are two main okay, I know that I'm in the cold. So I would love it. And it's okay if you don't want to come off mute or throw something in the chat. But if anyone has any examples of what being in the cold zone might look like for you, I'm just going to give like 10 or 15 seconds and I'll just keep talking if. So being too relaxed for sure, which is a real thing. You can actually have too much relaxation. Um, I I had a very similar talk that I gave to lawyers actually earlier this week, and too much relaxation was like everybody's eyebrows went together. Like, is that real? But in fact, it is. So apathy is a lack of motivation, and it often sometimes gives us signals that, oh, you don't really have to care about this. Avoidance is another thing. So when I was standing on mat and the entire pyramid had crumbled right on top of me, I was a base. And I was about to do my standing tumbling. It wasn't too much pressure. It was actually that I didn't have enough pressure. I didn't have enough of that, all of that stress in me to actually throw my standing tumbling. So yips is, and there's quite a bit of research and people much smarter than me that have started to look into this, but yips and the twisties actually are a little bit of a dorsovagal state, or that the body freezes. Now, I don't want to get super complicated, but sometimes we can actually get so much stress that our body reacts in a dorsovagal way, and it's like so much pressure or so much stress that we end up like not caring about anything at all. But that is actually an example of being in the too cold space. Okay, so I'm going to say the P word: perfectionism and agitation are good indicators that we're in the too hot space. I should say both apathy, avoidance, relaxation, agitation, and even wanting to be perfect, all of those things can be perfectly fine in the right space. So I'm not saying all the time wanting to be perfect or wanting to relax is a bad thing. However, they're really good indicators that we are getting close to the too hot zone. So I'm wondering if anyone has any examples that they want to share of what it might look like for them to be in the too hot zone.
I do actually have a story from my former All-Star days.
Yes, please.
Um, so an All-Star, I used to compete solo competitions when I was probably like, I don't know, 9, 10, or 11 years old. And I always did pretty good on them because it was just tumbling and I was always really confident in my tumbling. I never fell in any of my passes. It was all usually totally great and fine. And then we went to a competition where we won jackets if we got first place. And so this is the first time I remember putting a lot of extra pressure on myself. And I actually remember telling myself that all of my tumbling passes needed to be perfect this time. Like it wasn't just okay to land them, I needed to stick them. I needed to stick the landing, even though it's not really a thing in cheer. They don't want to take off points for not sticking all my landings. But anyway, I got into this like just mindset that everything I did needed to be perfect. And then when I got on the mat, I fell on my first tumbling pass, which has never happened before. And then I fell on my second tumbling pass, and then I forgot my dance, and I kind of froze a little bit. But I ended up finishing the routine. I just fell on all my tumbling passes and then ran off the floor crying. But that I think is a really good example of getting too hot, like too, I had that perfectionism mindset going into the competition and how that kind of backfired.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. We didn't get a lot of reactions because I think maybe we're like not in a space to react, but I feel like if I saw people's faces, I would see a lot of people nodding, because I think that we've all been in a similar position where we put so much pressure on ourselves that something like that happens. And then we freeze, because it does go around in a circle. Okay, so we've got, maybe hopefully we've given you some space to reflect on what your too hot and too cold is. Um, this is just in the research, what we see is that, and I know there might be some coaches in the room, so is that coaches might see someone who looks like they don't care or that they're lazy, or see someone who's really cranky, maybe like jumps at somebody or doesn't have time to hear them or listen to them and wants to just like go and do it again. And both of these areas are actually just an indication for us as coaches as well, and for each other and as we're leaders, to say, okay, that if this person is just a little too close to the cold state, how can we in the right ways for them increase pressure to help them get back into this place? Or if this person is like not listening to me and agitated, maybe I need to like back off a little bit and or help them decrease their own pressure on themselves. Like I think, Marie, you were putting a lot of your pressure on yourself for that jacket. So maybe we can help them see. And so these indicators aren't just for ourselves, but also for athletes. And there's been, this is all, I'm happy to share my citations if anyone's interested. But all of this is coming from research. Okay, so here's the most important part, maybe. How do we aim at the target, and then also what does that look like? How do we get into that pink zone, and what does that look like? So using stress means that we are able to appropriately address the situations that are coming up. And so um, as we start to work on using this and as we start to use our practices, we can widen this window. And I think that's really important because sometimes we forget that we're actually, our everyday habits and behaviors can actually help us take on more pressure or modulate and have more relaxation that will help our system be able to really use stress towards something. So this is a system that I call allogility, and there's a whole lot of stuff, and I'll give you some kind of like indicators on that later on. But this idea is that when we have too much, both and or too much pressure and too little pressure, our window is very, very narrow. And so the optimal stress zone is very narrow, and that means it's kind of precarious. And what our system is built for is the right amount of relaxation and high pressure. And so then that widens the window a little bit. But as athletes, and we are all athletes, thank goodness, because when I was performing, it was still a question as to whether cheerleaders were athletes. That's no longer a question. I work with a lot of athletes. I work with professional athletes and college athletes in lots of different sports. And what we actually need is not just what the normal amount of relaxation and up or down regulation, up regulation is. We actually need to stretch that or to widen that window even more. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that. I'm going to pause and see how everyone's feeling, if anyone has questions, and what came up for everyone. Hi, Alexandra. Oh, I think you're on mute, but I'm so excited that you came off on camera.
Sorry, half my athletes are on this Zoom actually right now. My question I would say is not allowing, so like Maria said, when you have that one incident that happens and then letting that spiral start to happen. That makes sense. Like having those 2 seconds, like, okay, it happened, be done, like we're over it,
Mm-hmm.
but continue on with the routine because I know like we just today they just worked really hard. They got a bid to nationals, so we're going to nationals in the spring. So getting the mindset of they'll not that they I wouldn't attack themselves or each other, but like they get into a bubble when something doesn't work or if the skill that they are looking for they think I'm expecting to hit should hit, but it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But taking that moment to, I guess, decompress and breathe and then be like, okay, it didn't work at that moment, that's fine, we can move on.
Yeah. So there's so much there. First of all, congratulations. That's amazing. Um, and I think maybe what we're talking about here is when there's two things. When I am personally disappointed in an outcome, if the pyramid crumbles on me and I am personally disappointed, how do I, if especially in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I don't have a whole 90 seconds to let that pass. How do I get into the right mindset and the right amount of pressure to change my own physiological state? And the second thing that Alexander's talking about, which is really important in team sports, is how do we have I'm going to use the word culture. There's other words that other people use, but how do we have the culture and the ways of interacting between us that we can still have high expectations for each other, but collectively move each other out of that state? The coolest thing here is that the nervous system is a social system, 100%. We have something called co-regulation, which means that if Alexandra and Maria and I are in the same room physically, we have not seen this through Zoom, although maybe it could work through Zoom, I don't know. But if the three of us were in the same room and I was really intentionally down regulating, we have something called co-regulation, which is when we're paying attention to each other and when we have some sort of connection, then Alexander and Maria will also downregulate. It's a really, really cool bit of research. There's a lot of stuff going on with it. But co-regulation hasn't been researched on teams and definitely not on cheer teams. So some of what I'm about to say is like, I'm guessing because of the research, but nobody's ever actually done this like with a cheer team. What we know is when we have a trusting bond, then in any relationships, when we have a trusting bond, then co-regulation can exist. And so I know I'm kind of like going all the way around here, but building a trusting bond, having trust and confidence in each other is the first most important space where when one person is upregulated, if we're in a trusting bond, we can downregulate, or when one person is really down, we can upregulate. So trusting bond is the first piece. The second is having shared language and agreements. um, Again, agreements is the term that I use. Sometimes different people will call them contracts, like verbal contracts, or we've come to some sort of space where we all are using the same. This is what we've agreed upon, right? These are the rules. I don't love that word, but some people use that too. When we have trust and we have agreements, then we can use the words that we've already come to agreement with to help us. So things like I'm too hot or I'm too cold. This means that when we've built trust and we have sat down as a team and said, you know what? Stunts are going to fall. Bobbles are going to happen. And when bobbles happen, how do we lift each other up? How do we help each other get to this next place? When we've built that agreement outside of the space, that's like a practice. And then you have the words, and you have to keep redoing that. You can't just do it once, because that doesn't, the nerve, what fires together hasn't wired together because it has only happened once, right? So you build the practice of whatever those encouraging words are, whatever that thing is to help us to get there. That's in the team space. In the individual space, it's just a tiny bit easier because you can start to do this internal practice. So in mental performance, we talk a lot about visualization and mental rehearsal. And one common misconception is that mental rehearsal and visualization is only about like doing the very, very best thing. And I would argue that that is really problematic. And in fact, you don't want to do that. You don't want to only visualize yourself hitting zero. In fact, we actually want to mentally rehearse what happens when the stunt comes down and then, or the pyramid comes down, and the next thing that I'm moving to is standing tumbling. Because I want to have that mental rehearsal of, things are going to happen. For my basketball players, they're going to, at least 40% of the time, maybe 30% of the time, if they're like really good, they're going to miss baskets. And so they have to actually mentally perform what it's like to miss. And so that is a little bit easier to do in an individual way, but in a group setting, I really encourage it too. Thank you for the question. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope I gave you something. Okay, I'm gonna move on to just some tidbits that you can write down. Oh, thank you, Krista. Yeah, man, because the perfection and visualization, like only visualizing hitting zero, only doing your very, very best, it actually is very likely to put us in the too much pressure zone. And so instead, we want to be able to visualize real life scenarios that might happen. We might collide no matter how much we want to be perfect and we are not crossing two panels, et cetera, we might collide. And so what's going to happen if we do? It's all I'm getting way too much into this, but I sometimes work with coaches on not having superstitions because superstitions mean that if you don't find the bobby pin on the floor, that you're potentially like knocking yourself out of whack, and that's not agility. Okay. Okay, so I have just like in this stress modulation space, I have some quick tips that I can give you to quickly take home or write down and research more on in all three of these areas. So the first is in this awareness or noticing, and it's called a check-in. And this is the building the interoception thing that I talked about earlier. There's lots of ways to do this. One way that I really like to encourage people, because it's just an easy way to do it, is to check in with how their cheeks are feeling. So if you are able and not driving or doing something else, check in with how your cheeks are feeling right now. You don't have to actually touch them, but maybe even touch them, like what's their temperature, how do they feel? How does your chest feel right now? And then how does your gut feel? And if this fires together enough and we practice it and we build it, this is a really nice check-in to be able to look at your internal system and see, okay, how am I doing? Am I too cold? Am I too hot? When we're in the too hot, close to or nearing too hot, often our cheeks will be hot. Often the chest will maybe like feel restricted. And it's also very important to say that interoception is not something that comes naturally, and the world and society often like takes it away from us. So if you don't feel anything in your gut right now, or if you can't like locate a sensation in your cheeks, that's totally fine. It's totally normal. The more we start to check in, the more that comes in. And then is the practice. And so I'm gonna just list three of the most useful and in the research most efficacious practices. There's lots and lots more of them, and you'll have my contact information, or Maria can give you my contact information if you want more. But the three practices that have been the most useful for stress modulation specifically are coherent breathing. And coherent breathing, I think that I can't remember who said Kara said box breathing earlier. Coherent breathing is actually not box breathing because it doesn't have a hold. It's just inhaling and exhaling. And the research there's been a lot of respiratory research around this and gas exchange research around this. And what they've found is that for the average height human, an inhale and exhale of about 5.8 seconds or 6 seconds is optimal for this practice. And so you can Google coherent breathing. There's like hundreds of videos and audio files around it. If anybody has an Apple Watch, your Apple Watch is actually cued to like when you do the breathing, it will expand and contract at about 5.8 seconds. But coherent breathing is a really good practice. Mental rehearsal is something that we talked about earlier, but being able to really spend time rehearsing, not just this. There's this line between mental rehearsal and visualization. Visualization is a meditation practice, and you sometimes like really think about the blue of the mat, and you like think about the milk house, which is now the ESPN center, and you like know what it looks like, and that is a visualization practice. A mental rehearsal is kind of like stepping back to a piece of that, and it's a little bit more cognitive. We don't have to kind of like visualize the whole thing to mentally rehearse. You can mentally rehearse when you're like getting on the train, or making tea, or brushing your teeth, but it's thinking through different steps of things, and if this happened, what would I do? Okay. And so finally, we've got this like reflection. I love journaling. I am a huge, huge fan of journaling. It's a really great reflective practice, and not everybody loves journaling. So I wanted to give something that's a little bit less like set a timer for 2 minutes, and so one way to just kind of really interrogate your physiological sense and how you're doing, how much pressure is too much or too little for you, is to look at what your response to a situation is or has been in the recent past. So for example, Kai really wanted us to go to the next screen, I think. There we go. So for example, oops, maybe. Okay, there we go. For example, if you are driving to work and somebody cuts you off, and you're maybe like very loudly swearing to absolutely no one, interrogating, is that like a little too much response to a situation? And for me, it is. For you, that might not be, and that's okay. Or if something happens and I'm like, I have a like startle response and I jump to something, really kind of thinking, how am I responding to a situation? And then how much load do I have? And put all of that on top of, and even just that equation, you'll start to see, I might be kind of stressed, or I might be like not doing enough right now, and sitting on the couch too much. And so just those two things can be really helpful. And then if you put that over your capacity, as you start to really understand what your capacity is, which is different than the person next to you's, that will start to give you a little more information about what you might need, what kind of practices might be helpful if you want to extend your exhale or your inhale. Okay. So I want to leave some time for us to talk. And so I'm going to go through the next pieces a little bit quickly. But what we've just done is we've looked at stress modulation, which is one of the cores of performance psychology. And we've looked at this optimal zone of stress, and that there's a hot and a cold zone for it. There's apathy and avoidance. There's perfectionism and agitation. And what we, just to remind everybody, what we really learned through the research is that there's this inverted U that shows us that there is poor performance on either side of this. So that's stress modulation, but we also have hot and cold for drive or motivation. We have hot and cold for discipline, or our habits, and for confidence, or how we feel about ourselves and others. And so I'm just, you're welcome to screenshot this. I'm happy to send this. I do want to leave space for us to talk, so I'm going to go really quickly through this. But in the motivation or drive space, if you have a fixed mindset, or you think that things are black and white, it's only about how talented you are, or you have a mindset that in the field we call a play to lose. Sometimes I kind of think that hit zero is a play to lose mindset. That can really get into that dorsovagal, or that too cold space. Similarly, if we're really externally driven, so if we're really worried about the jacket or the ring or the banner, and we're outcome focused and we're just playing to win, that can actually get into the too hot mindset. And so for drive and motivation, we've actually found that there's this space where if we have a growth mindset and we have passion, or like an internal sense of motivation, that is optimal. And we have this, we call it a play to dominate mindset, but it's not externally focused about the outcome, of fear of losing, or even a drive to win. Instead, it's that you want to be your very best self. That is the healthiest space. For discipline, we can also kind of look at the hot and cold spaces. So in the cold space, if you are only doing things when you want to do them or you feel like doing them, or when somebody has given you what to do and you're responsible for it because somebody else is expecting you to do it, then maybe there's some indication that we're in the too cold space. Similarly, if we're putting our sport above health, which includes sleep, college students, I'm going to say it again. If you're putting the sport above health, which includes sleep, or you have this things like superstition, then we're maybe getting into the hot space. But for discipline, making the sport a consistent priority and being disciplined not just for the sport but also in other areas of life is optimal. And then finally, for confidence, and there's lots of exercises and things that we can do here. Confidence is a really big one, but in the too cold space, if our sense of worth or confidence is based on what other people are saying, it's probably in the cold space. We can also be way too confident, and that is a very real thing. And if we're ignoring what other people are saying, then we could be in the too hot space. And actually, what's really interesting here is in confidence specifically, the optimal zone is knowing who's with me, that I have I have another base and a back spot. That was a girl base, I should say, and that we have a top girl, and this is us. It's not just about what they think about me or what I think about myself, but it's us. And that gets into some of the co-regulation that Alexandra helped us get into. And then finally, in the too cold space, if we haven't practiced, confidence that's going to happen. The number one killer of confidence is knowing what we could have done, and not ruminating on what could have done. That's imperfectionism. But like when we don't show up, we don't have confidence. And so showing up is important. On the other side of this, and this is really important for our coaches in the room, when we haven't been when we feel like we haven't been seen, that can get into the too hot space. And so for confidence specific, it's knowing who's behind me. It's honoring my coaches, knowing who had my back, who saw me, and that I showed up and other people were around. So that was a whole lot of information, but I wanted you to know that it's not just pressure, but there's a lot out there that we can really optimize in. And this is my information. And you have Maria's information, and so she can share it. I'm going to leave this screen on for just like 10 to 15 seconds. And then I wanted to give space where I can take the screen down and we can all kind of chat, and I can answer questions. So I'm just going to wait a few more minutes. But when you have questions, please come up. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Feel free to come on screen or off mute, or just drop questions into the chat.
If anyone missed the like email or something on the other side, I can send that in the chat or something too, if anyone still needs that.
Oh, I can probably do that.
I loved the last slide that you shared with just the whole diagram. Something that I noticed when I was thinking about the confidence slide at the end, how you talked about what gives you confidence is like who is with you. It made me think of mat talk and how important that is. But I also remembered some differences in mat talk. So when I was on the USA cheer team, they said a lot of things like, I got you, or we got this. Like my mid layers would say that to me on the way up to a pyramid, like, I got you. And I just found that to be much more motivating than somebody saying, you got this, which is what we often said on Ohio State. Like, you got this, you can do this skill, and very like you centered versus the we got this, like, I got you, like, we're going to get through this together type of mat talk. So that just made me think about that.
I love that so much. I also prefer a we. However, it's interesting. Oh, thank you. It's interesting because there are some of the research shows that some people really do gravitate towards the you. And so having kind of like a spattering, and eventually knowing your teammates enough, knowing when Maria's going to the corner. And so this is about her final pass. I don't know if you had a final pass, but I'm making it up. And I'm like, you got this, come on. Versus I'm a middle layer and I'm about to, she's about to flip on to me, like which is more encouraging.
Yeah.
I love that talk.
And I love how you showed the different with the playing not to lose and then the playing to win, how those are both can be bad things. Because
Yeah.
I've been on teams that play not to lose and they're really timid and things end up falling because they're so timid, they're so scared not to hit zero. And then I've also been on teams where we've played to win and it's the same thing, things spiral because something didn't go perfectly and then everything gets out of control. So I love that you kind of mentioned both those things too.
Interesting too, because I think a lot of sports psychologists will talk about this like play not to lose or play to win, in this mentality of like coaches shouldn't say we want to get first place because that's not in their control, for example. And I don't even think it's about that. I think it's actually that if your mindset is I want to win, then it's outcomes focused, it's externally focused, and it's just like hitting the system in the wrong way. If you're like I'm confident we have done this and I want to do this the best that I've ever done it, that's a completely different physiological state. um
Yeah,
yeah,
I think that's interesting because of course you want to win. Like
yeah,
that is the goal. And so I found like in the past, I feel like I've always struggled. I'm just an overthinker too. I think as an athlete, I just anytime someone is like, I want this routine to be perfect this time, I'm like, perfect? Okay, let me make sure I don't take a step in any of my tumbling and then I would spiral. So I just would
exactly.
like take things that coaches said super literally. And so when they would like say those outcome driven things, I would internalize it. And a lot of times it's like my own problem. It's not necessarily the coach saying, oh, we want to win. It was me internalizing that information and changing it and,
I
kind of,
think uh, I think it's this is like the awareness part. Like as we get to know ourselves, then we can kind of like recognize these moments. But I think it's why mental performance is so important is that those are the agreements as coaches. These are the choices that we're making is and how we verbalize things or how we word things matters. And so if we're pushing to win, then we're automatically creating overthinking or the too hot. Or if we're like, again, I don't, this is my personal opinion, but I think hit zero might like be a little bit of the like, I don't want you to fall, I don't want you to lose. And that we just have to be all of us to optimally perform. It's like constant growth and becoming aware of it. And we don't have to blame others, just like getting better, be better.
yeah.
I like it. Okay, does anyone else have anything? I see there's still some people on. I'd love to even just like hear what landed.
Any key takeaways? I had a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I'm happy. There's a lot of animation, so I'm not sure the PowerPoint might be confusing, but I'm happy to share the PowerPoint too. Thanks, Paige. Oh, I'm so glad, Krista.
All right, I wanted to give it like one more minute of awkward silence, but now that it looks like nobody else has anything else to add, I think we can officially wrap up. Thank you so much again for coming and talking. I definitely took a lot away from this. I love talking about this kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Um, so I'll be sure to share your information so that people can reach out if they have any additional questions. But otherwise, yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thanks for
everyone.
coming, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.